The courtroom was supposed to be ordinary that morning. Another hearing, another exchange of legal jargon echoing against marble walls. But as the camera panned across the bench, something about the air felt charged, alive, almost electric. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was waiting. Then Justice Stephen Breyer leaned forward and said the words no one expected from a man of his stature. "Ms. Crockett." That was extraordinary. For a fraction of a second, the room didn't know how to react. Reporters froze mid-note. Even the court clerk's pen stopped scratching. Jasmine Crockett blinked. Her expression caught somewhere between humility and fire, the look of someone who has fought too long to be surprised by respect. The moment replayed in slow motion for millions who would later watch it online. Breyer's measured tone, the faint tremor of sincerity in his voice, the stunned murmurs rippling through the gallery. It wasn't just acknowledgement, it was validation, public and undeniable from one of the nation's most respected jurists. Outside the courtroom, the news cycle erupted. Hashtags formed within minutes. Crockett moment, respect earned, truth in court. Commentators tried to spin it politically, but for the audience watching, it was something deeper, a flash of justice unfiltered by partisanship. Inside, Jasmine straightened her notes, her composure flawless. Yet behind her calm eyes, viewers could sense the storm. Years of doubt, of dismissal, of being underestimated. And now this. The camera lingered on her face. The kind of cinematic pause that lets the audience feel history breathe. The sound mix would be minimal, a faint heartbeat underscoring the stillness. No music, no applause, just the weight of the moment. For years she'd been told to wait her turn. That morning, respect arrived uninvited. The scene fades on Breyer's thoughtful expression, the light refracting off the bench like a lens flare of truth. Cliffhanger. But what happened next left the entire country in disbelief. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward, it was seismic. Every person in that chamber felt it, though few understood what it meant. Justice Breyer's words had cut through years of quiet tension surrounding representation, respect and power in America's most sacred institution of law. Outside, on the steps of the courthouse, cameras were already rolling. Headlines began to flash across news tickers. Breyer's unlikely praise stuns courtroom. A new voice emerges in Washington's halls. For many, it was just another viral moment. But for those paying attention, it was something much bigger, a cultural turning point. Jasmine Crockett had entered that courtroom under scrutiny. To some, she represented bold new energy. To others, an outsider challenging tradition. Her intelligence had never been in question, but her place had. And in a country still wrestling with old hierarchies, that unspoken bias lingered in the air like static. That's what made Breyer's respect so shocking. It wasn't performative. It was raw, unplanned, and, most importantly, undeniable. His tone didn't suggest a superior extending grace. It suggested a peer acknowledging brilliance. And that subtle difference struck at the heart of America's deepest conversation. Who gets to be seen as worthy? Meanwhile, media networks scrambled for angles. Commentators dissected every second of the clip. Some praised Breyer's open-mindedness. Others accused him of political theater. On social media, the reactions were explosive. Supporters celebrated Crockett's composure, flooding her profiles with messages of admiration. Critics rolled their eyes, claiming it was overblown. But in living rooms across the country, something quieter happened. Viewers saw the clip and paused. It wasn't just about politics, and it was about dignity. It was about the moment someone who'd been underestimated was finally seen for the depth of their intellect and the force of their presence. The narrator's tone grows more reflective, the music shifting from tension to slow building strings. In an age of noise and outrage, respect had become the rarest sound of all. But what happens when that respect threatens the hierarchy that silence was built to protect? As the clip continued to spread, insiders began whispering. Staffers, clerks, and aides spoke off record. She held her ground. He meant it. That moment wasn't supposed to happen. And that's when the real tension began. Not between the two figures in the courtroom, but between what the system wanted to suppress and what the public had already seen. Narrator pause. The camera panned slowly from the courtroom to a flurry of media headlines, a digital storm of praise, speculation, and spin. Then fade to black cliffhanger. But as the story spread, One figure's past began to surface, and it would change everything we thought we knew about this moment. Before that fateful day, Justice Stephen Breyer had long been a symbol of composure, the quiet intellect on the nation's highest bench. But beneath the polished surface of judicial neutrality lay decades of calculation, influence, and contradiction. To the public, he was the wise counselor of reason. Inside the chambers, however, he was known as a man who measured respect like currency, given only when it served the balance of power. Archive footage plays, Breyer in interviews, his tone calm, precise, and guarded. He speaks of order, of decorum, of respecting the institution. Yet behind those words lies a subtle truth. The very decorum he defended often acted as a gatekeeper, locking out the bold, the young, and the unconventional. The narrator's voice cuts through softly. For decades, he believed stability meant silence. That change, no matter how overdue, had to arrive dressed in humility. Cut to scenes from past hearings, moments where Breyer dismissed younger lawmakers or challengers with a gentle smile that ended conversations without ever raising a voice. He wasn't cruel. He was condescending, and that made him untouchable. But time has a way of shifting the ground under even the most careful feet. The political landscape around him was changing. New voices were rising, louder, faster, unfiltered. Jasmine Crockett represented everything that change embodied: passion, intellect, fearlessness. And for a man who'd built his legacy on predictability, that energy was unsettling. Insiders recalled subtle moments: the raised eyebrow when Crockett first entered the room, the faint smirk when she began to speak. He'd seen dozens like her before, idealists who challenged the old order but eventually bent to its weight. Yet that day something was different. Her arguments weren't emotional, they were surgical. Her presence wasn't loud, it was disciplined. It wasn't defiance that disarmed him, the narrator says. It was precision. Through flashback narration, we glimpse Breyer's early years, a young clerk, brilliant but rigid, mentored by a generation that valued tradition over disruption. That mentorship became a chain, one he didn't even realize he'd forged for himself. Now, decades later, he faced someone who shattered those unspoken hierarchies not with rage, but with clarity. In the control room, producers replayed the footage frame by frame. His reaction, the pause before he spoke, the faint nod, the flicker of realization, became internet gold. But what no one could see in that moment was the quiet war inside him: pride versus respect, habit versus humility. When a man who built his life on authority witnesses true merit, it challenges everything he thinks he knows about control. The narrator slows the pacing, letting viewers feel the internal storm. The villain here isn't pure malice, it's arrogance dressed as wisdom. That's what makes him human. That's what makes the story cinematic. As his words, Ms. Crockett, that was extraordinary, echo again in slow motion, the narration reframes them. It wasn't flattery. It was surrender. The visual fades to black and white news stills. Breyer leaving the courthouse, cameras flashing, headlines swirling. Respect had been given, but at a cost. He'd exposed a vulnerability the establishment rarely admits. Admiration for someone it can no longer control. Tear, swells, strings, and slow percussion, underscoring the transition from power to reckoning. Cliffhanger. But while Breyer's moment of humility shocked the nation, few knew what forged the woman who stood before him, and why she was never meant to stay silent. Before the cameras, before the headlines, before Justice Breyer's unexpected acknowledgement, there was Jasmine. Not the Congresswoman, not the legal powerhouse, but the young woman from Dallas who learned early that silence could either protect you or erase you. Flashback, a small living room lit by a flickering TV. A teenage Jasmine sits cross-legged, watching footage of congressional hearings, her eyes sharp and curious. Her mother's voice echoes faintly from the kitchen. You don't have to be the loudest in the room, baby, just the one who doesn't back down. Those words became her compass. In college, she was often the youngest in the room, often the only one who looked like her, and always the one expected to prove she belonged. She didn't fight that expectation. She dismantled it. Every case study, every mock trial, every late-night debate sharpened her like steel under pressure. Professors remembered her as the student who didn't chase grades. She chased truth. The narrator's tone softens. Before she learned how to win arguments, she learned how to survive them. Cut to scenes of her early legal career. Cheap suits, long hours defending clients no one else would touch. She took cases that were considered unwinnable. Tenants against corporations, workers against city contracts, the voiceless against the machine. Every loss hardened her. Every victory taught her that power bends when challenged with precision, not emotion. Her rise wasn't meteoric, it was methodical. Brick by brick. Word by word, she built a reputation not as the loudest reformer, but the sharpest strategist. When people underestimated her, and they always did, and she let them, they'd never see the pivot coming until their arguments crumbled in her calm, exacting cadence. The difference between confidence and composure, she once told a colleague, is who you're trying to convince. Then came the transition into public office. The lights got brighter, the criticism louder. The same qualities that once earned her respect now drew scrutiny. Commentators labeled her too direct, too poised, too confident. But Jasmine understood what they really meant, too unshakable for the role they'd assigned her. Cut to a montage. Campaign rallies, interviews, moments of defiance and grace. One clip stands out, a heated exchange where a pundit interrupts her mid-sentence. She pauses, looks him dead in the eye and says softly, "You can finish talking at me or you can start listening to me." That clip went viral, but Jasmine didn't celebrate. For her, virality wasn't the goal, not clarity was. As her career rose, so did the pressure. She faced whispers about her tone, her ambition, even her temper. But the truth was simpler. The system wasn't built for women who refused to shrink. And so, when she walked into that courtroom to present her arguments, she carried not just legal documents, but decades of unspoken expectations on her shoulders. Every doubter, every condescending nod, every subtle dismissal, all of it had led here. Some people arrived to prove they're right, the narrator says. She arrived to prove she belonged, and in doing so proved something much larger. Cinematic cut. Slow motion. Jasmine arranging her notes at the podium. The faint hum of cameras. Breyer watching, detached at first, then intrigued. Her voice steady, her words measured. It wasn't performance. It was preparation meeting inevitability. By the time she finished, the courtroom wasn't just listening. It was learning. Narrator. They thought they were watching a debate. What they witnessed was evolution. Her brilliance that day didn't come from defiance, and it came from years of discipline, a lifetime of being underestimated, and an unwavering commitment to never mirror the arrogance that once dismissed her. As the flashbacks fade, we return to that frozen moment. Breyer's words hanging in the air. "Ms. Crockett." That was extraordinary. Her expression doesn't shift. No smile, no visible triumph. Just a quiet acknowledgement because she'd spent too long preparing for a moment like this to be surprised by it. Cliffhanger. But no one in that room, not even her, could have predicted how fast the tension would rise once the questions began. The calm didn't last as the courtroom settled from Justice Breyer's unexpected praise. A faint shuffle of papers broke the silence. Across the bench, another figure cleared his throat, the antagonist of this unfolding drama. Senator Roland Hayes, known for his razor-edged rhetoric and disdain for performative intellect, leaned forward, his tone clipped with rehearsed condescension. "Ms. Crockett," he began, voice dripping with patronage. "That was eloquent, but perhaps you've mistaken eloquence for substance." The line hit like a spark in a room filled with oxygen. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Reporters raised their pens, sensing the shift. The hero versus villain contrast crystallized in a single glance. His smirk versus her composure. Jasmine didn't flinch. She adjusted her microphone, her gaze steady, unblinking. Viewers watching later would say it was the silence that made it cinematic. That long, unbearable pause before she spoke. A pause that made the senator visibly uneasy. "Substance," she replied softly, "isn't always loud enough for those who only listen to themselves." The crowd gasped. It wasn't shouted, it was surgical. Calm, precise, devastating. Hayes chuckled, feigning amusement, but his voice wavered slightly as he tried to regain control. "Well, perhaps your version of truth needs refining. You see, the court doesn't operate on emotional appeals or personal grievances." The way he said emotional carried weight. A subtle, coded dismissal. Every woman in the audience knew it. Every viewer online would soon amplify it. Narrator voiceover. In that moment, the debate stopped being about policy. It became a mirror for the country. Arrogance against authenticity, dismissal against dignity. The back and forth intensified. Hayes pressed her with rapid-fire interruptions, questioning her citations, twisting her phrasing. She answered each one with the same disarming calm. Facts, data, constitutional precedents delivered like arrows wrapped in silk. Camera direction, tight shots. Beads of sweat forming at Hayes's temple, Breyer watching silently, chin resting on his hand, eyes gleaming with quiet intrigue. "Do you believe your interpretation outweighs precedent, Ms. Crockett?" "No," she replied. "I believe precedent exists to be understood, not worshipped." The line landed like thunder. Even Breyer's lips curled into the faintest smile. The tension reached its breaking point when Hayes leaned forward and jabbed his finger toward her, his voice rising. "You think you can lecture this court? You think your moral posturing gives you authority here?" The camera would catch every detail. The veins at his temple. The way his words echoed through marble. The way Jasmine refused to move. Then, she said it. The sentence that would trend for days. Replayed in headlines, stitched into TikToks. Quoted across cable panels. "Authority doesn't come from titles, Senator. It comes from truth, and truth doesn't flinch." The room froze. The gavel nearly slipped from the clerk's hand. For a second, you could hear only breathing. Hayes leaned back, visibly rattled. Breyer exchanged a knowing glance with one of his clerks. The kind of subtle acknowledgement that said something just shifted. Outside, the media room buzzed. Tweets began flying. Did she just outclass a senator on live record? Crockett didn't argue. She dismantled. But truth doesn't flinch trended within minutes. Inside, Jasmine simply adjusted her notes again, her composure unbroken. Narrator. What began as a debate had turned into a reckoning. But the real explosion hadn't even begun. Cliffhanger. Because when Jasmine decided to respond, fully, fearlessly and publicly, the courtroom would witness a takedown so precise, even Justice Breyer couldn't hide his astonishment. The tension was unbearable. Hayes leaned back in his chair, smirking again. That same self-satisfied look of a man who believed he'd re-established dominance. The air was thick with expectation. Every journalist in the room had their cameras angled at Jasmine Crockett. She didn't rush. Instead, she reached for her notes, took a measured breath, and then looked directly at the senator. "Senator Hayes," she began, her tone calm but cutting. "You remind me of something my grandmother used to say. The loudest one in the room usually has the least to say." A ripple of chuckles swept through the audience. Even Breyer shifted slightly, eyes locked on her. She continued. "You've spent the better part of this hearing trying to tell me what my experience means. How my education, my work, my values somehow don't fit your definition of substance. But here's the thing." She raised her eyes from her notes, voice sharpening just enough to pierce through the room's stillness. "Substance doesn't fear scrutiny. It welcomes it. Because truth, real truth, doesn't tremble when questioned. But arrogance?" She paused. "Arrogance hides behind noise." Boom. The line echoed. The camera would cut to Hayes, blinking rapidly, attempting a forced grin. His lips moved as if searching for a retort, but nothing came. Jasmine pressed on. "You said the court doesn't operate on emotion. But tell me, Senator, when was the last time you entered this chamber without emotion guiding your vote? Without ego guiding your words?" There it was, the unspoken accusation made visible. Breyer's brow lifted slightly, his pen frozen mid-air. Around them you could feel the moral gravity shift. "You lecture about neutrality while defending policies written to silence people like me. You call it law. I call it legacy, and the legacy of pretending bias is balance." A stunned silence. Reporters scribbled furiously. Jasmine's tone softened, deliberate, intimate, like she was no longer speaking to Hayes, but to the nation itself. "This isn't about me versus you. It's about who we allow to speak for truth. It's about whether intellect has to sound a certain way to be respected, whether conviction must be cold to be credible." A slow zoom on her face, calm, unwavering, lit by conviction. "You can question my arguments, Senator, but you will not question my right to make them." That sentence hit like a gavel. Applause began, hesitant at first, then growing. Breyer's lips curved into what might have been the faintest smile. Hayes looked cornered, eyes darting toward his staffers, searching for a lifeline that wasn't coming. Narrator voiceover, cinematic tone. What happened next wasn't debate. It was dismantling. Every statistic, every precedent, every rhetorical weapon Hayes tried to throw came undone. Quietly, methodically, she cited rulings, historical contradictions, even moments from Hayes' own past statements. Each time she followed with a calm line that stung harder than any insult could. When you dismiss the truth, Senator, it doesn't make it disappear. It just waits for someone brave enough to repeat it louder. A beat of silence. Then the coup de grace, and today I'm not just repeating it. I'm recording it, on the public record, so that the next generation knows exactly who stood for truth and who tried to bury it. That final line landed like a hammer. The entire room rose. Cameras clicked wildly. Hayes sat frozen, face pale, the weight of his own hubris finally visible. The narrator's tone swells with orchestral backing. It wasn't shouting that won the moment. It was composure. It wasn't anger that triumphed. It was clarity. And in that instant, a courtroom became a stage, and a takedown became a lesson in grace under fire. Social media footage montage begins. Flashes of tweets, headlines, clips replaying in slow motion. Crockett's mic drop moment shakes Washington. Truth doesn't flinch. A new face of courage emerges. Legacy of dignity trends nationwide. Back to the courtroom, Jasmine gathering her papers, walking out slowly as reporters swarm the hallway. Voiceover. But outside those marble walls, the real shockwaves were only beginning. Because while millions were inspired, others were quietly plotting how to take her down. Cliffhanger. And by nightfall, what began as a standing ovation had transformed into a digital firestorm, one that would test everything Jasmine believed about truth, respect, and survival. By the time Jasmine stepped out of the courthouse, the world had already rewritten her story. Within minutes, the clip of her exchange with Senator Hayes had flooded every social platform. Someone had slowed it down, added cinematic strings, and posted it with the caption, "Composure has a new name." Another edit juxtaposed her calm stare with Hayes' flustered expression. The moment arrogance met grace. In less than an hour, "Truth doesn't flinch" was the #1 trending hashtag in America. By evening, it had gone global. The montage plays like a digital storm, TikToks dissecting every syllable, Twitter threads analyzing her constitutional references, YouTube reaction videos with titles like "Jasmine Crockett just gave a masterclass in power." But with virality comes polarity. Cable networks began their nightly spin cycles. On one side, praise, admiration, awe. On the other, cynicism, distortion, resentment. A conservative commentator sneered into the camera, "This isn't brilliance, it's performance. Let's not mistake attitude for intellect." A liberal host fired back, "If composure, facts, and constitutional literacy scare you, maybe you're the one performing." Each side amplified the moment, for clicks, for ratings, for relevance. But beneath the noise, something real was happening. Viewers weren't just watching Jasmine Crockett, they were feeling her. Clips of young women, especially women of color, flooded social media. "I've never seen someone like me talk like that in that room." She didn't just argue, she stood her ground with elegance. That's what power looks like, calm, not cruel. The narrator's tone softens. For once, the internet wasn't celebrating chaos. It was celebrating composure. In offices, cafes, and classrooms, debates broke out. Was it about law, gender, race, ego, or something deeper, a collective hunger for grace in a world addicted to outrage? Meanwhile, in the senator's camp, silence. His team scrambled to control the narrative. A leaked memo showed strategy notes labeled "Discredit, Emotional Control Narrative." It backfired instantly. Screenshots went viral, painting him not as the victim of disrespect, but the architect of arrogance. Then came the celebrity reactions. Actors, musicians, even retired judges posted tributes. One viral tweet read, "Jasmine Crockett didn't just win an argument, she reminded America what integrity sounds like." Late-night hosts joked about Hayes' meltdown, replaying his stammer on loop with laugh tracks. But beneath the laughter there was something profound, a shift in tone. For once decency was entertaining again. Cut to a quiet moment. Jasmine, in her apartment, scrolling through her phone. The glow of the screen flickers across her face. Admiration, love, validation. But also something else. The weight of expectation. Voiceover. Fame in the age of outrage is a double-edged sword. One moment you're the symbol of truth. The next, you're the target of envy. That night, as hashtags trended and commentators debated, a new storm brewed, not of applause but of agendas. Anonymous accounts began twisting her words, splicing clips out of context, turning respect into controversy. The camera pans to Jasmine watching a pundit misrepresent her statement on live TV. She closes her eyes, exhales, and whispers to herself, "This isn't about me anymore." The music shifts, slower, heavier. Narrator. What began as a single moment of courage had become a mirror held up to a nation, reflecting who we cheer for, who we silence, and what kind of strength we truly admire. But the story wasn't over. Because somewhere behind the scenes, a powerful institution, the very one that once dismissed her, was now reconsidering its stance. Cliffhanger. And when that call finally came, from the one place she least expected, Jasmine would discover that respect wasn't the end of her journey. It was just the beginning of her reckoning. The call came at dawn. A soft vibration on the nightstand, a number Jasmine didn't recognize. She hesitated, then answered. "Ms. Crockett," the voice said. Formal, calm, almost reverent. "Justice Breyer would like to speak with you." The line went quiet. Then his voice, steady, warm, filled with the kind of sincerity that no headline could capture. "You reminded the country of something we've forgotten," he said. "That strength isn't noise. It's clarity." That single sentence landed heavier than any applause she'd received. It wasn't flattery. It was recognition. The kind earned, not given. As the sun rose through her apartment window, the chaos of the previous day seemed distant, almost unreal. The hashtags, the arguments, the praise and backlash, all of it fading under the quiet realization that something inside her had shifted. Voiceover, soft and reflective. When the world applauds you for standing tall, it's easy to mistake the noise for purpose. But real victory isn't in trending, it's in transforming. Cut to a slow montage. Jasmine walking through the city streets, billboards flashing her image, news anchors debating her message. But she's not watching anymore. She's listening. To conversations, to people. To the ripple effect of truth. A young woman stops her on the street. "You made me want to study law," she says, eyes bright. Not to win, to understand. Jasmine smiles. Small, genuine, the kind of smile that says this is why it mattered. Narrator. That was the real aftermath. Not the noise. Not the memes. But the shift. Quiet. Powerful. Invisible. Inside the people who saw themselves in her courage. In one scene, she's invited to a university to give a talk. The camera lingers as she looks over the audience, rows of students diverse, attentive. Her speech isn't grand, it's grounded. You'll be told to quiet down, to wait your turn, to speak only when spoken to. Don't. Because the world doesn't change when the loudest speak. It changes when the calmest don't back down. The audience stands. Applause fills the hall. Not wild, but heartfelt. Voiceover. Respect, once earned through grace under fire, became her armor. But it wasn't about revenge or validation. It was about redefining what power sounds like. Cut to a quiet moment, Jasmine at her desk penning a letter. We see the final lines written in her handwriting. I didn't set out to win an argument. I set out to remind people that truth doesn't flinch, and if you stand for it long enough, neither will you. Narrator tone deepens, orchestral music swells. In a time when shouting wins the clicks, silence built on truth can still win the soul. That's what Jasmine proved, that integrity isn't outdated, it's undefeated. The final montage shows her walking away from the courthouse steps, blending into the crowd. No entourage, no spectacle, just a figure of quiet defiance. Cliffhanger for outro transition. Because even after the applause fades, one question remains. Will we carry her lesson forward, or wait for another voice to remind us what dignity sounds like? The screen fades to black. A slow heartbeat underscores the silence. Then Jasmine's voice returns, calm and resolute. They tried to question my place, but truth doesn't need permission to stand. The image fades in. Slow motion clips of her walking down the courthouse steps, the crowd parting around her. The music swells, strings and percussion building toward a quiet triumph. Narrator. Voiceover. In every generation there comes a moment that reminds us, power isn't volume, it's vision. Dignity isn't weakness, it's endurance. A collage of faces flashes across the screen. Students, workers, veterans, mothers, young men watching on phones in the dark, all inspired by the same spark. Because every time someone chooses composure over chaos, truth wins again. The camera cuts to Jasmine looking into the distance, faint sunlight outlining her silhouette. Voiceover, soft but firm. You watched one person stand in the storm and stay unshaken, but the real question is, will you? Pause. The screen flashes with her final quote bold across the frame. Truth doesn't flinch. Then, the narrator closes. If you believe dignity still matters, share this story. Be the reason respect becomes contagious again, because movements don't start with mobs, they start with moments like this. Music rises to a final crescendo. The visuals fade into a single closing frame. Truth doesn't flinch. Subscribe, stand tall, stay informed. Then, silence. Fade out.